The gun was already in his hand when the door clicked open under his fingers. Damon Whitfield stepped into the dark apartment without a sound, the way he had done 100 times before, the way his body knew how to do without his mind giving it permission. Somewhere behind that door, in the small bedroom at the end of the hall, was a woman named Elena Marsh. His boss had given him a folder, a photograph, and a single instruction: find her tonight. Don't let her see the sunrise. He moved past the kitchen counter, past a bowl of fruit that had gone soft, past a jacket hanging on a chair. The apartment smelled like vanilla candles and old coffee, ordinary smells. Somewhere in this ordinary apartment was a woman who had betrayed the Whitfield family in a way that cost 2 men their lives and a shipment worth more money than most people would see in 10 years. The bedroom door was half open. He pushed it the rest of the way with 2 fingers. She was awake, sitting up in bed, one hand already reaching toward the lamp, her eyes wide with the kind of fear that comes only when a stranger is standing in your bedroom at 2 in the morning. "Don't," Damon said quietly, raising the gun just enough for her to see it clearly. "Don't scream. Don't reach for your phone. Just stay still, and this will be over fast." The woman froze. Her hand dropped back to the blanket. In the thin light coming through the curtains, he could see her properly now. Dark hair, pale skin, a face that matched the photograph in his jacket pocket closely enough that he hadn't questioned it for a second when he'd found this address. "Please," she whispered, "please, I don't understand what's happening." "You know exactly what's happening," Damon said. "You know what you did." I don't know what you're talking about. My name is Claire Whitmore. I work at a bookstore. I haven't done anything to anyone." Damon's jaw tightened. Targets always claimed innocence. It was the oldest trick in the world, the last desperate move of someone staring down the barrel of a gun. He had heard it before, dozens of times, and it had never once been true. "Elena," he said, "don't waste the last minutes of your life lying to me." "My name isn't Elena." Her voice cracked, but there was something underneath the fear now. Something sharper. Confusion, maybe. Or conviction. "I have a driver's license. It's in my purse. Right there on the dresser. Please, just look, please." Something in the way she said it made him pause. Targets begged. Targets cried. Targets offered money, offered information, offered anything at all to buy another minute of life. But they didn't usually ask him to check a driver's license, calm and clear, like a person telling the truth and expecting to be believed. He kept the gun trained on her, but reached over with his free hand and picked up the small leather purse from the dresser. He unzipped it one-handed, feeling for the wallet inside, never taking his eyes off her. The license slid out easily. He held it up, angling it toward the thin light. Claire Whitmore. The photograph matched the woman sitting in front of him, terrified, her hands now pressed flat against the blanket, like she was trying to keep herself from shaking apart. The address matched the one on his folder. Everything matched, except the name. Damon felt something cold settle in his stomach, a feeling he did not get often anymore. Doubt. "Explain this," he said, his voice lower now, less certain than it had been a minute ago. "I can't explain something I don't understand," Claire said. "I've lived here for 2 years. I've never called myself Elena in my life. Whatever you think I did, whoever you think I am, you have the wrong person. Please, just look at me. Do I look like someone who could hurt 2 men? I can't even kill a spider without covering my eyes." Damon lowered the gun an inch. Just an inch, enough that the barrel no longer pointed directly at her chest, but somewhere near her knees. It wasn't mercy. It was recalculation. Every instinct trained into him over the last 11 years told him to finish the job and disappear into the night before anyone noticed the light was on. But another part of him, a part he rarely listened to, was doing arithmetic. If this woman was telling the truth, and the file was wrong, then someone inside the organization had handed him the wrong address, the wrong face, the wrong life to end. And that meant somewhere out there, the real Elena Marsh was still breathing, still free, still capable of doing whatever had gotten 2 soldiers killed. "Who gave you this apartment?" he asked. "Who signed the lease before you?" Claire blinked, thrown by the sudden shift in his questions. "I don't know. I found it through an agency. It was already furnished when I moved in." "Why does that matter? Why are you asking me questions instead of just..." She stopped herself, unwilling to finish the sentence, as if saying it out loud might make it happen. Damon studied her face for a long moment. Fear did strange things to people, made some of them go quiet and small, made others talk too fast, too much, filling silence, because silence felt like the last few seconds of something. Claire was doing both, her sentences tumbling out and then catching in her throat, her whole body pulled tight like a wire. He should finish it. That was the job. That was the order, given to him directly by Nathaniel Whitfield, the man who had raised him from a scared 17-year-old with nothing to his name into the most trusted enforcer the family had. Nathaniel did not tolerate hesitation. Nathaniel did not tolerate mistakes. And Damon standing here, gun lowered, having a conversation with his target instead of finishing his task, was already a mistake that could not be undone by simply pulling the trigger now. But if he was wrong, if this woman really was nobody, an innocent stranger who happened to rent an apartment that once belonged to someone else, then killing her would not fix anything. It would just be another body, another weight, and somewhere out there, the real threat would keep moving, keep breathing, keep laughing at how easily she had disappeared behind another woman's face. "Get up," he said finally. Claire flinched. "What?" "Get up. Slowly. Put on a coat. We're leaving." "Leaving? Where? Why?" "Because if I'm wrong about you," Damon said, "then someone lied to me, and I need to find out who, before they send someone else here to finish what I couldn't." Claire stared at him like he had spoken in another language. "You're not going to hurt me?" "I don't know yet," he admitted, and it was the first honest thing he had said to her since walking through her door. "But standing here arguing about it isn't keeping either of us alive. Move." She moved, slowly, carefully, like a woman walking on ice. She slid out of bed and pulled a coat over her sleep clothes. Her hands trembled as she tied the belt, but she didn't argue again. Somewhere between the driver's license and his lowered gun, she seemed to understand that her best chance of surviving this night was to do exactly what the stranger with the gun told her to do. Damon guided her out of the bedroom, through the small living room, keeping her slightly ahead of him and to the side, out of habit, more than suspicion now. At the door, she paused. "My phone," she said. "Can I bring my phone?" No. He didn't explain why. He couldn't risk anyone tracing a signal, couldn't risk her calling for help the second his back was turned. Not yet. Not until he understood what he was actually dealing with. Outside, the night air was cold and sharp, and the street was empty, except for a stray cat slipping between two parked cars. Damon led Claire to a dark sedan parked half a block down, opened the passenger door for her, and waited until she was inside, before circling around to the driver's seat. "Where are we going?" she asked, her voice small in the quiet car. "Somewhere safe, for now." "Safe from who?" Damon started the engine, checked the mirrors out of habit, and pulled away from the curb before answering. "From the people who sent me to kill you." Claire went very still beside him. "Then who are you?" He didn't answer right away. 20 minutes ago, the answer would have been simple. He was the man sent to finish a job. Now, driving through empty streets with a woman who might or might not be a stranger to the family he had given his entire adult life to, the answer felt more complicated than it had any right to be. "Someone who made a mistake," he said finally, "and now I have to fix it before it gets both of us killed." They drove in silence after that, the city lights sliding past the windows, Claire's hands folded tightly in her lap, Damon's eyes flicking constantly to the rearview mirror, watching for headlights that lingered too long, for cars that turned when he turned. He took a longer route than necessary, doubling back twice, cutting through a parking garage and out the other side, every maneuver instinctive, every choice designed to make sure no one could follow them, even if someone had already noticed his car leaving Claire's street. "You do this a lot," Claire said eventually, watching him check the mirror for the 5th time in 10 minutes, making sure no one's following. "It keeps people alive," he said, "including you, right now. Is that supposed to make me feel better?" "No, it's supposed to make you understand how serious this is. Whoever gave me your address either made an honest mistake, which happens rarely, or they wanted me to kill the wrong woman on purpose, which is much worse. Until I know which one it is, you don't go home, you don't call anyone, and you don't tell a single person what happened tonight." Claire wrapped her arms around herself, staring out the window at the passing buildings. This is insane. 3 hours ago I was asleep. Now I'm in a car with a man who broke into my apartment to kill me, and he's telling me not to call the police. The police can't protect you from the people I work for, Damon said flatly. I can. For now, that has to be enough. He pulled into the underground garage of a building on the edge of the city, a place he kept for exactly this kind of situation. Unregistered, untraceable, paid for years ago in cash under a name that didn't belong to him. The apartment inside was sparse, functional, nothing like a home. A bed, a table, a locked cabinet Claire would never be allowed to open. You'll stay here, he said, unlocking the door and stepping aside to let her in first. There's food in the kitchen. Don't use the phone on the counter. It's a landline that goes straight to a number I monitor. If you need something, you use it to reach me, nothing else. Claire stepped inside slowly, taking in the small space with wide, uncertain eyes. How long do I have to stay here? Until I figure out who Elena Marsh really is, Damon said, and why someone wanted her to look exactly like you. He watched her sit down carefully on the edge of the bed, still wrapped in her coat, still shaking slightly from cold or fear, or both. For a moment, something in his chest tightened in a way he didn't have a name for, something he hadn't felt in a very long time, not since before the family had trained every soft edge out of him. I need you to trust me, he said. I know that sounds impossible after tonight. But right now, I'm the only thing standing between you and the people who want you dead, whether that was a mistake or not. Claire looked up at him, her eyes red-rimmed but steady now, the initial shock giving way to something more grounded. Why should I trust a man who held a gun to my head an hour ago? Because I lowered it, Damon said, and because if I wanted you dead, you already would be. She didn't answer, but she didn't argue either. Damon stepped back into the hallway, pulling the door shut behind him, and stood there for a long moment in the dim light, running through everything that had happened in the last 2 hours. Somewhere in the Whitfield organization, someone had handed him a target that didn't exist, a woman who shared a face and an address with someone she had never met. That kind of mistake didn't happen by accident. Files were checked, addresses were confirmed. Photographs were verified against records that took days to compile. Someone had built this trap on purpose, and Damon Whitfield, the man who never questioned an order, who never hesitated, who never let doubt slow his hand, had just spared the life of a woman his boss believed was already dead. He pulled out his phone and stared at the screen for a long moment before dialing a number he trusted more than almost anyone else in his life. It rang twice before a familiar voice answered. It's late, the voice said. This better be important. I need everything you have on Elena Marsh, Damon said quietly, glancing once more at the closed apartment door behind him. Not the file version, the real one, because the woman I was sent to kill tonight isn't her. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Then who did you almost kill? Damon closed his eyes, thinking of Claire sitting on the edge of that narrow bed, terrified and alone in a stranger's apartment, trusting him only because she had no other choice left. Someone who has no idea what she just survived, he said, and someone I need to keep alive long enough to find out why. He ended the call and stood in the silent hallway, the weight of the night pressing down on him. For 11 years, he had never once questioned an order. Tonight, questioning one might be the only thing that kept an innocent woman alive, and it might be the thing that finally turned the Whitfield family against him. Claire didn't sleep. She sat on the narrow bed with her knees pulled to her chest, listening to every creak in the building, every distant car engine, every sound that might mean the man who had promised to keep her safe was actually the man coming back to finish what he started. By the time gray light crept through the thin curtains, she had convinced herself of a dozen different endings to this story, and none of them were good. The lock on the door clicked just after 7. She froze, pressing herself back against the headboard, until Damon stepped inside carrying a paper bag that smelled like coffee and warm bread. He looked exhausted, the kind of tired that came from a night with no sleep at all, his jaw tight, his eyes scanning the room out of habit before he even looked at her. You're still here, he said, and there was something almost like relief in his voice. Where else would I go? Claire asked. You took my phone. I don't even know what city block this building is on. He set the bag down on the small table without comment and pulled out 2 coffees and a paper-wrapped sandwich, sliding them toward her. Eat something. You look like you haven't slept. I haven't. Funny how that happens when a man breaks into your apartment with a gun. Damon didn't flinch at the accusation, though something in his expression tightened. He pulled out the chair across from her and sat down heavily, rubbing a hand over his face. I spent the night trying to figure out who set this up. I don't have an answer yet, but I have enough to know it wasn't a simple mistake. Claire wrapped her hands around the warm coffee cup, more to steady her fingers than for the heat. What does that mean? It means someone inside my organization wanted Elena Marsh's face on your address. Someone changed records, or planted them, so that when I went looking for her, I'd find you instead. He met her eyes. Someone wanted you dead in her place. The words landed like a stone in her stomach. Why? I don't even know an Elena Marsh. I've never heard that name in my life until last night. That's what I need to find out. Damon leaned forward, elbows on his knees. I need you to think carefully. Have you moved recently? Changed your address anywhere? Filled out any paperwork in the last few years where someone else might have used your name or your apartment as a cover? Claire frowned, trying to force her tired mind to work through the question seriously instead of just spiraling in fear. I moved into that apartment 2 years ago. Before that, I lived with my sister for a while. After my old lease ended, I don't remember filling out anything unusual. It was just a normal apartment agency, normal paperwork. What was the address before you moved in? Do you remember who had it? No. The property manager just said it had been vacant for a few months before I signed the lease. She paused, something flickering at the edge of her memory. Actually, there was mail. For the first few weeks, I kept getting mail addressed to someone else. I assumed it was just a mix-up, so I marked it returned to sender and forgot about it. Damon's eyes sharpened. Do you remember the name on that mail? Claire closed her eyes, trying to picture the stack of envelopes she'd tossed onto the counter without much thought 2 years ago, back when her biggest worry was learning the new neighborhood and not accidentally setting off a Mafia hitman's night. I think, yes, it was Elena. Elena something. I didn't pay attention to the last name because I never opened it. Damon sat back slowly, the pieces sliding into place in his mind, even as they raised more questions than they answered. So Elena Marsh lived in your apartment before you did. And somehow, when someone built the file to track her down, they used your current address instead of wherever she moved to. Which means either the file is outdated, or... He stopped himself. Or what? Or someone wanted it to look outdated. Wanted whoever went looking for her to find you instead. He stood up, pacing the small room now, his mind working faster than his feet could keep up with. If someone inside the family wanted Elena protected, framing an innocent woman as the target would be one way to do it. Send the killer after the wrong person. Let the real Elena disappear completely. Claire watched him move, unable to fully follow the logic but understanding enough to feel a fresh wave of fear settle over her. So either way, someone used me. Someone who has never met me, who doesn't even know I exist, decided my life was worth sacrificing to protect someone else's. Damon stopped pacing and looked at her, and for the first time since he'd stepped through her bedroom door the night before, his expression softened into something that resembled guilt. I'm sorry. I should have verified the file myself instead of trusting it blindly. That's on me. Is that what passes for an apology in your world? You're sorry you almost killed me because you didn't double-check your paperwork? The words came out sharper than she intended, fear and exhaustion bleeding into anger now that the immediate danger had passed enough for her to feel something other than terror. Damon didn't argue with her. He simply nodded, accepting the anger as something he'd earned. You're right, he said. It's not enough. But right now, an apology is the only thing I have to offer, and finding out who did this, and stopping them before they try again, is the only way I can actually make it right. Claire studied him for a long moment. This strange, dangerous man who had held a gun to her head only hours ago, and was now sitting across a table from her, offering coffee and something that almost resembled remorse. Nothing about the situation made sense, and yet here she was, trusting him simply because the alternative, being alone, unprotected, with no idea who wanted her dead, was far worse. What happens now? She asked, Now I need to find out who fed me that address, Damon said. There's a records office inside the organization, a small team that handles surveillance files, confirms addresses, cross-checks photographs before an order goes out. If someone altered a file, it happened there. I need to talk to the person who manages it, carefully, without raising suspicion that anything went wrong. And if they figure out you're asking questions instead of doing your job. Damon's jaw tightened. Then I'll have a much bigger problem than a wrong address. He explained, as simply as he could, the world Claire had been dragged into. The Whitfield family wasn't just a name. It was an organization that controlled entire sections of the city's shipping routes, its underground trade, its quiet corners of influence that never appeared in a newspaper. Nathaniel Whitfield sat at the top, a man who had built his empire through discipline and fear in equal measure. A man who did not forgive mistakes, especially mistakes made by the people he trusted most. 2 of his men were killed a few weeks ago, Damon explained. An ambush during a shipment exchange. The information about the exchange's location had been leaked, and Elena Marsh was identified as the source. She worked briefly for the organization years ago, doing bookkeeping, low-level work. When the ambush happened, someone remembered her name and connected the dots. So she really did betray your family. Maybe, Damon said, or maybe she's being framed the same way you almost were framed, to die in her place. I don't know yet. That's the part I need to figure out before anyone else gets hurt. Claire pulled her knees up to her chest again, processing everything he'd told her. This is insane. Yesterday my biggest problem was a customer complaining that we didn't have a book in stock. Now I'm hiding in some secret apartment, because a crime family thinks I betrayed them, even though I've never even heard of them until last night. I know it doesn't make sense, Damon said, but right now, the safest thing you can do is stay here, stay quiet, and trust that I'm working to fix this. And if you can't fix it? He didn't answer right away, and the silence stretched long enough that Claire understood the answer without him having to say it out loud. I'll fix it, Damon said finally, his voice low and certain in a way that surprised even him. I got you into this. I'm not walking away until you're safe. He left not long after, promising to return before nightfall, warning her again not to use the phone for anything but reaching him, not to open the door for anyone else, no matter what they said or how convincing they sounded. Claire spent the day pacing the small apartment, running through everything she knew, searching her memory for anything else that might connect her to a woman she had never met. By late afternoon, exhaustion finally won, and she fell into a restless sleep on top of the covers, still fully dressed, one hand curled near the edge of the bed, as if she might need to run at any moment. She woke to the sound of the door unlocking, jolting upright with her heart hammering before she recognized Damon's silhouette in the doorway. His expression was different than it had been that morning. Harder, more urgent, a man who had learned something he didn't like. What happened? Claire asked, already standing, already bracing for bad news. The record was accessed 3 days before the order came down, Damon said, closing the door behind him and locking it with more force than necessary. Someone pulled Elena Marsh's old file, added your address to it, and made it look like a routine update. Whoever did it had high enough access to touch surveillance records without anyone questioning it. Who has that kind of access? Damon's jaw tightened, and when he spoke, his voice carried a weight that told Claire this was information he wished he didn't have to say out loud. Very few people, and one of them is someone I've trusted for years. The name sat between them like a loaded weapon. Damon hadn't said it yet, and Claire could see the struggle on his face, the reluctance of a man who didn't want to believe what the evidence was telling him. Who is it? She asked. Victor Langley, Damon said finally. He runs the records division. He's been with the family almost as long as I have. I trained under him when I first started. If he's the one who altered that file, then he's the one who sent me to your apartment last night. Why would he do that? What does he gain from having me killed instead of the woman he's actually protecting? Damon sat down across from her, running a hand through his hair, exhaustion and frustration written across every line of his face. That's what doesn't make sense yet. If Victor wanted to protect Elena Marsh, framing you as her would only work temporarily. Eventually someone would realize the mistake, the way I did. Unless he was buying time for something. Moving her somewhere permanent. Making sure she disappeared completely, before anyone else came looking. So he's helping her? Or he's using her, Damon said. Victor doesn't do anything without a reason that benefits him first. If Elena Marsh has information that could hurt him, protecting her keeps that information buried. If she has something he wants, keeping her alive and controlled serves him better than letting anyone else find her first. Claire wrapped her arms around herself, the pieces of a world she didn't understand slowly forming into a shape that terrified her more with every new detail. So there are two dangerous things happening at once. Someone framed me to die in her place, and the man who did it might be using her for something even worse. That's my read on it, Damon admitted. Which means finding Elena Marsh isn't just about proving your innocence anymore. It's about figuring out what Victor is protecting, and why he was willing to sacrifice you to do it. The next few days blurred together, in careful, controlled movements. Damon came and went at unpredictable hours, always checking the street before entering, always scanning for anything out of place. He brought Claire updates in small pieces, fragments of information gathered from careful conversations with people he trusted, from records he accessed without leaving a trace, from surveillance photos pulled from old files that hadn't been touched in years. Elena Marsh, it turned out, had worked for the Whitfield organization briefly, 5 years earlier, managing a small set of financial records for a shipping company that served as a front for other business. She'd left abruptly, without explanation, and had seemingly vanished from any official record since. No new address, no new job history, nothing that would explain how she resurfaced years later as the supposed source of a deadly leak. It's like she stopped existing, Damon said one evening, spreading a handful of printed pages across the small table, while Claire watched from across the room, arms crossed, trying to absorb information that felt more like a puzzle from a movie than something happening in her actual life. No tax records after her departure, no new lease under her name, no utility bills, no bank activity that I could find. People don't just disappear like that unless someone helps them do it. Victor, Claire said. Probably. Damon tapped one of the pages, a faded photograph of a younger woman with cautious eyes and dark hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. This is the only recent photo I could find of her, taken right before she left the organization. If Victor helped her disappear back then, it means he's been protecting her for years, not just now. Which raises the question of why the ambush happened at all, if he's been keeping her hidden and safe this whole time. Claire studied the photograph, something uneasy stirring in her chest as she looked at the woman's face. She doesn't look dangerous. She looks scared. People who end up in the middle of organizations like mine usually are, Damon said quietly, and for a moment, something raw passed behind his eyes, some memory or thought he didn't share. Scared people do desperate things. Sometimes it makes them dangerous anyway. Later that night, after Claire had finally drifted into an uneasy sleep, Damon sat alone at the table, staring at the photograph until the lines of Elena's face blurred in his tired vision. He thought about the 11 years he'd spent inside the Whitfield family, about every order he'd carried out without question, every file he'd trusted, because trusting the file was easier than doubting the entire system he'd built his life around. Now doubt had cracked that foundation, and he couldn't stop pulling at the thread even though he knew where it might lead. He made a call the next morning to a contact outside the organization entirely, someone who owed him a favor from years ago, someone who worked in a different circle, but had eyes and ears in places Damon couldn't reach directly. The conversation was brief, careful, full of half-sentences and coded phrases that meant nothing to anyone listening in, but carried real weight between two people who understood the language of survival. By afternoon, he had a location. A small coastal town 2 hours outside the city, a rented cottage under a name that wasn't Elena Marsh, but matched a description close enough to be worth the drive. "I'm going," Damon told Claire when he returned, his tone leaving no room for negotiation. "I need to see her myself. Find out what she knows. Find out why Victor has been protecting her all this time." "I'm coming with you," Claire said immediately. Damon shook his head. "Absolutely not. It's safer for you to stay here." "Safer, according to who? You said yourself that whoever's after Elena might not stop looking, and if they figure out I'm connected to this at all, hiding in an apartment isn't going to protect me forever. I want to understand what's happening to my life. I deserve that much." He studied her for a long moment, torn between the instinct to protect her by keeping her far from danger, and the recognition that she wasn't wrong. Hiding her away indefinitely wasn't a real solution, and if this ended without her ever understanding the full truth, she would spend the rest of her life looking over her shoulder without knowing why. "Fine," he said finally, "but you do exactly what I tell you, when I tell you. No arguments, no hesitation. If I say run, you run. Understood?" "Understood." They left before dawn the next morning, the city slowly giving way to quieter roads, then to open countryside, then finally to the winding coastal path that led toward the small town where Elena Marsh had apparently been hiding for years. Claire watched the scenery shift outside the window, trying to hold on to something normal in the middle of a situation that felt increasingly like it belonged to someone else's life. "What are you going to say to her?" Claire asked as they got closer, the first signs of the coastal town appearing ahead, small shops and weathered houses lining a quiet main street. "I don't know yet," Damon admitted. "It depends on what she says first." The cottage sat at the edge of town, half hidden behind overgrown hedges, a small structure that looked like it hadn't been properly maintained in years, despite someone clearly living inside. Damon parked a block away, out of sight of the front windows, and the two of them approached on foot, moving carefully along the tree line. "Stay behind me," Damon murmured as they neared the front door. "If anything feels wrong, you go back to the car and you drive away. Don't wait for me." Claire nodded, her heart pounding so loudly she was certain he could hear it. Damon knocked twice, waited, then knocked again. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then the curtain in the front window shifted, just slightly, someone watching from inside without opening the door. "Elena," Damon called out, keeping his voice low and steady. "I'm not here to hurt you. I need to talk. It's about Victor Langley." The silence stretched long enough that Damon began to wonder if she would simply refuse to answer at all. Then, slowly, the sound of a lock turning came from the other side of the door, and it opened just a few inches, revealing a pale, cautious face that matched the photograph Damon had studied for hours. "Who are you?" Elena asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "How did you find me?" "My name is Damon Whitfield," he said. "I work for Nathaniel Whitfield's organization. I was sent to kill you 3 nights ago. Instead, I found her." He gestured toward Claire, standing a few steps behind him. "Someone used her identity to protect you. I want to know why." Elena's eyes widened, moving from Damon to Claire and back again, something like recognition flickering across her face before it collapsed into fear. "You need to leave," she said, her voice shaking now. "Both of you. If you found me, others can too. Victor said this place was safe." "Victor lied," Damon said, "or he's running out of ways to keep his secret buried. Either way, I think it's time you told me the truth about what really happened 5 years ago, and what you know that's dangerous enough for someone to frame an innocent woman just to buy you a little more time." Elena's hand tightened on the edge of the door, and for a long moment, it seemed she might simply close it and refuse to say another word. Then, slowly, something in her expression shifted, exhaustion overtaking fear, the weight of years of hiding finally becoming too heavy to carry alone. "Come inside," she said quietly. "But you should know, once I tell you what I know, there's no going back. Victor will come after all 3 of us." The inside of the cottage was small and sparse, a single lamp casting weak light over a room that held little more than a couch, a table, and stacks of paper piled in one corner, like someone had been building a case against the world for years without anyone to hand it to. Elena moved slowly, gesturing for them to sit, while she remained standing near the window, glancing out at the quiet street every few seconds, as if expecting headlights to appear at any moment. "5 years ago, I worked in the records office," Elena began, her voice steadier now that the door was locked behind them. "Victor ran that department even then. Most of what I did was simple, tracking shipments, matching numbers, nothing that seemed important. But I started noticing things that didn't add up, numbers that didn't match, shipments logged as one thing that turned out to be something else entirely when they reached their destination." "What kind of shipments?" Damon asked. "People," Elena said quietly, and the word hung in the small room like something poisonous. "Not every load, Most of it really was exactly what it claimed to be. Goods, product, whatever you want to call it. But every few months, there would be a shipment that didn't match anything in the official records, moved under Victor's personal authorization, bypassing the usual checks. I didn't understand what I was looking at first. It took me months to realize the numbers I was seeing weren't cargo weights. They were head counts. Claire felt her stomach turn, the abstract danger she'd been living with for days suddenly taking on a shape far darker than she had imagined. Damon's expression hardened, his jaw tightening, as pieces he hadn't wanted to consider began sliding into place. "You're saying Victor was trafficking people," he said, his voice flat, controlled, the way a man speaks when he's forcing himself to stay calm. "I'm saying I found evidence that pointed that way," Elena said. "I never saw it directly. I never had proof strong enough to take to anyone, especially not Nathaniel, who trusted Victor completely, but I kept copies. Records I photographed before they were supposedly destroyed, notes I made when things didn't line up. I was building a file, planning to take it somewhere safe, somewhere outside the organization, when Victor found out I'd been asking too many questions." "What happened?" Claire asked quietly. "He gave me a choice," Elena said. "Disappear quietly and stay disappeared, or he would make sure I disappeared in a way that wasn't quiet at all. I took the offer that let me keep breathing. I left everything behind, my job, my apartment, the small life I'd built, and I let him move me somewhere he controlled, thinking it meant safety. It took me years to understand it, just meant a longer leash." Damon leaned forward, elbows on his knees, processing the weight of what she was telling him. And the ambush, the leaked shipment information that got 2 of our men killed, was that connected to this? Elena shook her head slowly. "I don't know anything about that. I've been out of the organization's daily business for 5 years. I don't know who leaked that shipment or why, but I have a theory, and you're not going to like it." "Tell me anyway." "I think Victor needed a scapegoat," Elena said. "Someone to blame for the leak, someone whose death would close the investigation quickly and quietly before anyone looked too closely at who actually had access to that shipment's details. My name was still buried in old files as someone who left the organization under strange circumstances, easy enough to resurrect as a traitor, especially since I'd already vanished and couldn't defend myself." "But you didn't vanish completely," Damon said, understanding dawning slowly. "You were still connected to an old address that eventually got reassigned to her." He nodded toward Claire. "When the order came down to find you, the address in the file led straight to the wrong woman, because Victor never bothered updating a record he assumed no one would ever check again. Or, he wanted it that way," Elena said. "Think about it. If the wrong woman dies in my place, the file closes. Everyone believes the traitor is dead. No one keeps looking for me, and Victor's real secret stays buried forever." The room fell silent, the weight of the theory settling over all 3 of them. Claire sat frozen on the edge of the couch, trying to process the idea that she had nearly died, not because of a random mistake, but because she had become a convenient tool in someone else's careful, calculated cover-up. "He was willing to let me die," she said slowly, "to protect a trafficking operation." "I believe so," Elena said gently, some of her earlier fear giving way to something like sympathy as she looked at Claire. "I'm sorry. None of this should have touched you. I never wanted anyone else pulled into this." "It's not your fault," Claire said, surprising herself with how steady her voice sounded. "It's his." Damon stood, pacing the small room, his mind working through the implications faster than he could speak them aloud. If Victor really had been running a trafficking operation under Nathaniel's nose for years, protected by his position of trust and his control over the very records that would expose him, then the danger extended far beyond the 3 of them sitting in this small cottage. It meant people were still being moved, still being hurt, still being treated as numbers in a ledger instead of human beings. And it had been happening for half a decade, while the man responsible walked freely through the same halls Damon had trusted with his life. "We need proof," Damon said finally. "Real proof, not just your memory of numbers that didn't match. If we're going to bring this to Nathaniel, if we're going to stop Victor, we need something undeniable." "I have some of it," Elena said, moving toward the corner of the room where the stacks of paper sat gathering dust. Photographs I took of the original ledgers before they disappeared. Notes comparing the official shipment records to what I actually witnessed. It's not everything, but it's a start. Is it enough to get Nathaniel to believe you over a man he's trusted for over a decade? Damon asked. Elena hesitated, doubt flickering across her face. I don't know, Victor is careful. He's had 5 years to cover his tracks even further since I left. Whatever I have might only be the beginning of what actually exists. Then we find the rest, Damon said, together. Because right now, 3 people know the truth, and one of us has been running from it for 5 years, while the other 2 nearly paid for it with their lives. That ends now. Claire looked between them, something steady settling into her chest, despite the fear still coursing beneath it. She had spent days as a passenger in someone else's dangerous world, hidden away, protected, kept in the dark about most of what was happening around her. But sitting in this small cottage, hearing the full shape of the danger she'd been dragged into, she felt something shift. She wasn't going to just wait quietly for this to be resolved around her anymore. What can I do to help? She asked. Both Damon and Elena turned to look at her, surprise evident on both their faces. You've already done more than enough just by surviving, Damon said. The safest thing you can do now is stay out of it. No, Claire said, shaking her head firmly. I was almost killed because of a mistake someone else made. I spent days locked in an apartment, terrified, with no control over anything happening to my own life. I'm done being someone this just happens to. If there's something I can do to help stop the man responsible, I want to do it. Damon studied her for a long moment, something like respect flickering behind his tired eyes. You have no idea what you'd be walking into. Then explain it to me, Claire said. Because I'm not going back to hiding in that apartment waiting for someone else to decide my fate. Not again. Elena, watching the exchange, allowed herself a small, tired smile, the first genuine expression of anything other than fear that had crossed her face since they'd arrived. She reminds me of who I used to be, before all of this started, she said quietly. Before I learned that silence was the only thing keeping me alive. Silence isn't going to keep any of us alive anymore, Damon said. Not with what we know now. Outside, the sun had begun to set over the quiet coastal town, painting the sky in deep oranges and purples, a deceptive calm settling over a place that held far more danger than its peaceful appearance suggested. Somewhere back in the city, Victor Langley had no idea that the woman he'd spent 5 years hiding had just decided to stop hiding at all, and that the man he'd sent to eliminate a mistake was now standing directly in his path. We need to move carefully, Damon said, gathering the pages Elena had handed him and sliding them into a bag. Victor has resources, people loyal to him inside the organization. If he learns we've found Elena, if he learns what we know, he won't hesitate to make all 3 of us disappear permanently. Then we don't give him the chance to find out until we're ready, Elena said. Damon nodded, already turning over a plan in his mind, calculating who among the Whitfield organization could be trusted with the truth, and who might already be compromised by Victor's years of careful influence. It was a dangerous line to walk, gathering evidence against a man with eyes throughout the entire organization, all while protecting 2 women who had already paid too high a price for secrets that were never theirs to carry. Tonight we stay here, he said. Tomorrow, we start building the case that ends this. All of it. Claire looked out the small window at the darkening sky, thinking of everything that had happened in less than a week, from a stranger in her bedroom with a gun, to sitting in a hidden cottage plotting against a man responsible for unimaginable harm. Fear still lived in her chest, steady and constant, but underneath it now sat something else entirely, determination. And for the first time since that terrifying night, she felt like more than just a target caught in someone else's crossfire. They left the coastal cottage before sunrise, Elena's bag of evidence tucked carefully in the trunk of Damon's car, 3 people bound now by a secret, dangerous enough to end all of their lives if it fell into the wrong hands. The drive back to the city felt longer than the trip out had, every mile bringing them closer to a confrontation none of them could fully prepare for. You said Nathaniel trusts Victor completely, Claire said from the back seat, breaking the tense silence that had settled over the car somewhere around the 2nd hour. How do we convince him to believe evidence against a man he's trusted for years? especially when it comes from people he might see as compromised. Carefully, Damon said, eyes fixed on the road, hands steady on the wheel despite the tension radiating through his shoulders. Nathaniel built this family on control and information. He didn't get where he is by refusing to look at evidence, even evidence that's inconvenient. But we need to present this the right way, with enough proof that he can't dismiss it as some kind of personal vendetta. And if Victor gets to him first? Elena asked from the passenger seat, her voice tight with the particular fear of someone who had spent 5 years successfully avoiding exactly this confrontation. If he finds out we're back in the city before we reach Nathaniel? Then we lose whatever advantage we have, Damon admitted, which is why we're not going through the front door. He explained his plan slowly as the city skyline began to appear on the horizon, the familiar shape of buildings that suddenly felt far more threatening than they ever had before. Nathaniel Whitfield kept a private office separate from the organization's main headquarters, a place he used for meetings he didn't want logged in any official record. Damon had been there only a handful of times over the years, but he knew the security patterns, knew the small window of time each evening when Nathaniel reviewed reports alone before his personal guards rotated shifts. "We go there directly," Damon said. "No calls ahead. No way for word to reach Victor before we're already standing in front of Nathaniel with the proof in hand." "That's incredibly risky," Elena said. "If anything goes wrong, if Nathaniel doesn't believe us immediately, we'll be trapped in a building full of his men with no way out." "I know," Damon said. "But waiting gives Victor more time to cover his tracks. Or worse, more time to find out we're already back and moving against him. We don't have the luxury of a safer option." Claire watched the tension in Damon's shoulders, the careful way he navigated every turn as if expecting danger around each corner, and felt her own fear settle into something more focused, more useful. She thought about the fear she'd carried through every hour of hiding, the helplessness of waiting in a locked apartment for other people to decide her fate. Whatever happened next, at least she would be facing it directly, instead of hiding from it. They reached the private office just as the sun began sinking low over the city, casting long shadows across the quiet street where the building stood, unremarkable from the outside, giving no hint of the power that moved through its walls. Damon parked 2 blocks away, the same careful precaution he'd used every time he'd moved through the city these past days, and the 3 of them approached on foot, staying close to the buildings, avoiding the direct light of street lamps. "Let me go first," Damon said quietly as they neared the entrance. "I'll explain the situation to the guard at the door. He knows me. He'll let me through without questions. But both of you stay back until I signal it's safe." Claire and Elena exchanged a glance but nodded, watching as Damon approached the single guard stationed near the side entrance, engaging him in a low conversation that Claire couldn't fully hear from where they waited in the shadows. After a tense minute, the guard stepped aside, and Damon waved them forward. Inside, the building was quiet, the kind of quiet that came from careful design rather than emptiness. Thick carpets absorbing footsteps, heavy doors muffling any sound that might carry between rooms. Damon led them up a narrow staircase to a private office on the 2nd floor, knocking twice on a heavy wooden door before pushing it open without waiting for a response. Nathaniel Whitfield sat behind a wide desk, papers spread in front of him, looking up with an expression of mild surprise that quickly sharpened into something more guarded as he took in the sight of 3 people entering his private space unannounced. "Damon," he said slowly, setting down the pen in his hand, "you have exactly one reason for walking into my office like this, and it had better be a good one." "Elena Marsh," Damon said, stepping forward and gesturing toward the woman beside him. "The target from 3 nights ago. I found her. But not before I nearly killed the wrong woman, because someone altered the file that led me to her address." Nathaniel's eyes moved slowly from Damon to Elena, then to Claire, taking in every detail with the careful, calculating attention of a man who had survived decades in a dangerous world, by never missing important information. "Explain," he said simply. Damon laid out everything methodically, starting with the night he'd broken into Claire's apartment, moving through the discovery of the altered records, the trip to find Elena, and finally, the evidence she carried in the bag now sitting heavily on the floor beside them. Nathaniel listened without interrupting, his expression unreadable. though Claire noticed his hands had gone very still on the desk in front of him. When Damon finished, Nathaniel turned his attention to Elena. "You claim Victor Langley has been running a trafficking operation, using this organization's shipping routes for at least 5 years." "I don't just claim it," Elena said, her voice steadier than Claire had heard it since they'd met her. Something like courage, finally overtaking years of fear, now that she stood in front of the one man who could actually do something about what she knew. "I have evidence. Copied ledgers, notes comparing official records to what I witnessed directly. It's in the bag beside Damon." Nathaniel gestured for the bag, and Damon carried it forward, setting it on the desk and stepping back as Nathaniel began pulling out the pages, examining each one with slow, deliberate attention. The silence stretched for several long minutes, broken only by the soft rustle of paper, as Nathaniel worked through the evidence Elena had risked her life to preserve. "If this is accurate," Nathaniel said finally, not looking up from the pages spread across his desk, "it means Victor has been operating directly under my authority for years, using resources I control, protected by trust I gave him freely." His voice carried a controlled fury that made the room feel colder despite nothing physically changing. "It also means he was willing to let an innocent woman die simply to protect that secret." "Yes," Damon confirmed. Nathaniel looked up, his eyes moving to Claire for the first time since she'd entered the room. "You're the one whose apartment he sent Damon to that night." "Yes," Claire said, forcing steadiness into her voice, despite the weight of Nathaniel's attention. "I had never even heard the name Elena Marsh before that night. I still don't fully understand this world, but I understand enough to know that a man decided my life was worth sacrificing to keep his secrets buried." Something shifted in Nathaniel's expression, a flicker of something that might have been respect, or perhaps simply recognition of the strength it took to stand in this room and speak so directly to a man most people feared without ever meeting. "You have my apology," Nathaniel said, "for the danger this organization brought into your life without your consent." He turned back to Damon. "Where is Victor now?" "I don't know," Damon admitted. "We came straight here, without contacting anyone else, to make sure word didn't reach him before we had a chance to present this evidence." Nathaniel nodded slowly, already reaching for the phone on his desk. "Then we need to move quickly, before he realizes his secret has been exposed, and decides to disappear the same way Elena once did. Or worse, decides to eliminate every loose end that could expose him." He made a call, his voice low and controlled, giving instructions that Claire couldn't fully follow, but that clearly set something significant in motion. Men began arriving within minutes, quiet, serious figures, who moved through the building with the same careful precision Damon had shown throughout the past several days. "Victor will be brought here," Nathaniel said, ending his call and looking back at the 3 people standing in front of his desk. "Quietly, before he has any reason to suspect his secret has unraveled. When he arrives, this evidence will be presented to him directly, and he will answer for what he's done." "And after that?" Elena asked quietly. Nathaniel's expression hardened into something final and absolute. "After that, he will no longer be in a position to threaten anyone. Not you, not her." He nodded toward Claire. "Not this organization's reputation, which he has already damaged beyond what I can easily forgive." The next hour passed in tense, careful waiting, Damon standing near the door with the alert readiness of a man prepared for anything, Elena pacing slowly by the window, Claire sitting rigidly in a chair Nathaniel had offered, trying to process the surreal reality of watching justice unfold in a private office, belonging to a man most of the world would call a criminal. When the door finally opened and Victor Langley walked in, escorted by 2 of Nathaniel's men, his easy confidence faltered the moment his eyes landed on Elena standing by the window. Whatever explanation he had prepared, for whatever he assumed this meeting was about, died instantly on his face, replaced by the unmistakable look of a man realizing his carefully built world had just collapsed entirely. "Nathaniel," Victor started, his voice attempting casual confidence that didn't quite mask the tremor underneath. "I don't understand what's happening here." "I think you understand perfectly," Nathaniel said, sliding the stack of evidence across the desk toward him. 5 years of careful lies, Victor. Explain them to me now, in front of the people you nearly destroyed to keep them buried." Victor's eyes moved over the pages, and Claire watched the last of his composure crumble as he realized exactly how thoroughly his secret had unraveled, and exactly how little chance he had of talking his way out of the room he'd just walked into. For a long moment, Victor said nothing at all, his eyes still fixed on the pages spread across the desk, evidence of 5 years of careful, quiet crimes finally laid bare in front of the one man whose trust had made all of it possible. When he finally spoke, his voice had lost the smooth confidence Claire imagined he usually carried, replaced instead by something desperate and cornered. "Nathaniel, whatever you think you're seeing here, it's not the full picture," Victor said, straightening slightly, trying to reclaim some measure of control over a situation that had clearly already slipped far beyond his reach. "I can explain every piece of this." "Then explain," Nathaniel said, his voice dangerously calm, the kind of calm that Claire had already learned, even in the short time she'd known this world, meant something far more threatening than shouting ever could. "Explain why there are records of shipments that don't match anything logged in our official manifests. Explain why headcounts appear in your personal files that have no connection to any product this organization has ever moved." Victor's eyes flicked briefly toward Elena, something bitter and accusatory crossing his face, before he forced his attention back to Nathaniel. "She was supposed to be gone, permanently silent. I gave her a chance to disappear quietly, instead of ending things the way protocol demanded, and this is how she repays that mercy." "Mercy," Elena repeated, her voice sharp with 5 years of buried anger, finally finding an outlet. "You call trapping me in isolation for half a decade mercy. You call threatening my life if I ever spoke a single word mercy. I didn't repay anything, Victor. I survived, and I kept the truth safe until someone was finally willing to listen." "And when that wasn't enough," Damon added, stepping forward with barely controlled fury in his voice, "when the leak happened and 2 of our men died, you decided the easiest solution was to resurrect a 5-year-old file and send me to kill an innocent woman who had never even heard your name, just to close the investigation before anyone looked too closely at your own operation." Victor's composure finally cracked entirely. "I didn't leak that shipment information. I don't know who did. But when the investigation started, when people started asking questions about how the ambush happened, I needed it to end quickly before anyone traced it back far enough to find what I'd actually been doing." Elena's old file was already flagged as suspicious. It was the fastest way to close the loop, even if it meant killing someone who had absolutely nothing to do with any of this, Nathaniel said, his voice cold enough that even Victor seemed to shrink slightly under its weight. "You were willing to let an innocent woman die, not to protect this family, not out of any loyalty to the organization you claim to serve, but purely to protect yourself and the operation you built behind my back." "Nathaniel, please," Victor said, and for the first time, real fear entered his voice, the desperate pleading of a man realizing exactly how much danger he now stood in. "I've served this family for over a decade. Whatever mistakes I've made recently, surely that counts for something." "It counts for exactly nothing," Nathaniel said, standing slowly from behind his desk, "when weighed against what you've actually done. You didn't just betray my trust, Victor. You used this organization's resources I built through decades of careful work, to profit from human suffering in ways I would never have allowed had I known. And then, when your secret was threatened, you were willing to spill innocent blood to protect it." The room fell into a heavy, suffocating silence, Victor's eyes darting between the faces surrounding him, searching desperately for any sign of sympathy or hesitation, and finding none. Claire watched the scene unfold with a strange, detached clarity, understanding that she was witnessing the collapse of a man whose careless cruelty had nearly ended her life, without her ever knowing his name. "What happens to him?" Claire asked quietly, unable to stop herself from voicing the question everyone in the room seemed to be silently considering. Nathaniel turned to look at her, something almost gentle entering his expression, despite the coldness that had defined every word he'd spoken to Victor. "He will no longer have the power or the position to hurt anyone else, ever again. That, I can promise you." Victor was led away by 2 of Nathaniel's men, his protests growing quieter as the door closed behind him, leaving the 3 of them alone with Nathaniel once more, the tension in the room slowly beginning to ease now that the confrontation had finally reached its conclusion. "What happens now?" Elena asked, her voice carrying the exhaustion of someone who had spent 5 years running and had finally, unexpectedly, stopped. Now, the trafficking operation Victor built will be dismantled completely, Nathaniel said. Every route, every contact, every piece of that network traced and shut down. It will take time, but it will be done thoroughly. He looked at Elena directly. And you no longer need to hide. Whatever protection Victor offered you was built on threats and control, not genuine safety. You have my word that you are free to rebuild your life, fully, without looking over your shoulder. Elena's eyes filled with tears she seemed determined not to let fall. 5 years of careful survival finally allowed to release into something like relief. Nathaniel then turned his attention to Claire, his expression softening into something almost apologetic. And you were pulled into a world you never asked to be part of, nearly losing your life because of decisions that had nothing to do with you at all. I understand that no apology can fully undo what you experienced, but I want you to know that this organization, flawed as it may be, does not tolerate what Victor did to you. I appreciate that, Claire said carefully. But I think what I need now, more than an apology, is to understand what happens to my life going forward. I can't just go back to pretending none of this happened. You won't need to hide, Nathaniel said. Victor's fall removes the threat that put you in danger in the first place. Your life and your safety are no longer at risk because of this organization. He glanced toward Damon. Though I imagine some things may have already changed regardless. Claire followed his gaze to where Damon stood, watching her with an expression she hadn't quite seen from him before. Something less guarded than the careful control he'd maintained through every dangerous moment of the past several days. They left Nathaniel's office as the last light of evening gave way fully to night, the city stretching out below them, familiar streets that somehow felt different now, weighed with everything Claire had learned and survived in less than a week. Elena was given a car and an escort to begin the process of rebuilding a life she'd been forced to abandon 5 years earlier, tears finally slipping free as she embraced Claire briefly before leaving, a silent thank you passing between two women whose lives had been forever changed by the same dangerous secret. "What happens to you now?" Claire asked once they were alone, standing near Damon's car on the quiet street, the adrenaline of the past days finally beginning to fade into something closer to exhaustion. "I'll stay with the organization," Damon said. "There's cleanup to handle, Victor's operation to fully dismantle, trust to rebuild after everything that happened. Nathaniel will need people he trusts completely for that, and despite everything, he still trusts me." "And me?" Claire asked, the question carrying more weight than the simple words suggested. "What happens to me now that the danger is gone?" Damon studied her for a long moment, the careful distance he'd maintained through every dangerous encounter of the past days, finally softening into something more honest. "That depends on what you want. You're free now, truly free. No threat hanging over you, no reason to hide. You can go back to your apartment, your job, the life you had before I broke into your bedroom and turned everything upside down." "That's not really an answer," Claire said. "No," Damon admitted, a small, tired smile finally breaking through the exhaustion on his face. "It's not. What I want to say is that I don't know how to walk away from someone who trusted me even after I held a gun to her head, someone who chose to fight instead of simply hiding when I offered her the chance to stay safely out of danger. I don't know how to just disappear back into my life and pretend the last several days didn't change something in me." Claire felt something warm settle over the exhaustion and lingering fear still living in her chest, an unexpected feeling given everything she'd survived. "So what are you saying?" "I'm saying I'd like the chance to know you outside of danger," Damon said. "Not as someone I'm protecting from a threat, but simply as yourself, if that's something you'd want, after everything I've put you through." Claire looked at him for a long moment, weighing the impossible strangeness of the past week against the steady, quiet sincerity in his voice now. Somewhere in the chaos of nearly losing her life, of hiding, of uncovering secrets that reshaped everything she thought she understood about the world, something had shifted between them that neither fear nor danger could fully explain away. "I think I'd like that," she said finally. "But you're going to have to earn back a significant amount of trust first. Breaking into someone's bedroom with a gun isn't exactly a strong foundation for a relationship." Damon's smile grew, genuine and unguarded in a way Claire hadn't yet seen from him. "I think I can work with that." They stood together on the quiet street as the city lights flickered on around them, the danger finally behind them, an uncertain but hopeful future stretching out ahead. Claire thought about everything she'd survived, the fear, the confusion, the strange and dangerous world she'd been thrown into without warning, and realized that somewhere in the middle of all that chaos, she had found something unexpected. Not just survival, but the beginning of something real, built from the wreckage of a mistake that could have ended everything, but instead had led to a truth worth fighting for.